Hello, welcome to this Weird Pride Day event, which nearly radically was not going to
Mhm.
be broadcast to you on Weird Pride Day because that would have been sufficiently weird. But it turns out we are now all assembled, Avengers weirdly assemble, and here we are. I'm nominally chairing. I've taken the word nominally quite literally. I'm a bit like, what does it mean that I'm nominally chairing? Like, anyway, I'm going to take it as I'm sort of actually chairing. So I'm going to
Can I just ask a
introduce.
question?
Go on.
Isn't anything which involves a panel of neurodivergent people that anyone who is given the job of chairing is ultimately only nominally doing it because of the chaos that will ensue?
Well, are all neurodivergent events inherently going to be chaotic, even though I implied they were going to be by saying it was kind of not weird that we didn't all get here at the same time? Is
Yeah,
it? Question. Do you think, yeah? See,
It
I'm
can
going
be
to
intensely
introduce you and
structured.
then you can maybe answer each of you this question. I'm going to start off with Sonny Hallett, whose work on um, autism, on being autistic and a counsellor, on being autistic trans, um, uh, multicultural, straddling liminal in between figure across many axes, has been ongoingly inspiring to me. Um, so we have Sonny, we have Joanne Limburg, whose work as a poet with the autistic Alice has was one of the, if not the first collection that focused on an autistic perspective. Is that, I mean, that is the first mainstream published collection, actually.
Probably, and probably it was the first mainstream collection. I'll just hold it up to have it'll be backwards, which is fine and weird. The word autistic right there in the title, very
Yeah.
much on purpose.
And then Letters to My Weird Sisters, weird in the title, autism and feminism. No, that's not right, is it? On autism and feminism. On is really
Yes,
good.
they 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 added motherhood for the paperback, but originally it was autism and feminism.
I've never seen that. And then Robin Ince, who's, and I'm going to have to look at the title because I get it the wrong way round every time. Normally Weird and Weirdly Normal, My Adventures in Neurodiversity, came out last year and has been really transforming some of the worldviews, particularly I would say of late diagnosed neurodivergent folks who are somewhere on the ADHD autism axis. Um, do I need to? And I'm Kate Fox. I'm a stand-up poet. My show, Bigger on the Inside, looked at Doctor Who and neurodiversity together in the same lens thing. Anyway, each of us, I reckon, should say whether we think an event, a panel event that is a neurodivergent panel event, is likely to be chaotic. Robin, you've mooted this.
well, it's not
Silly.
necessarily that it'll be chaotic, but I mean, I can only base it on my own anecdotal experience.
Mm.
And that if it's not chaotic, it's a bit boring. That's what I think is I think what makes things exciting is the fact that everyone connects. I do think this is what I really mean by chaotic, which is because everyone's connecting and everyone's listening and everyone's analyzing and going through what's going on. You don't just answer the question and then the interviewer goes, "My next question is," that with each answer you are then entering an increasingly kind of evocative and extravagant choose your own adventure game
Mm.
because
Uh,
everyone then wants to go, oh, hang on, that's woken up this line of thought and that's woken up that line of thought. And so we keep just creating the crazy string.
Crazy string, yeah, or even it blow it out of the crazy four dimensions.
Yeah.
Because
mm,
string is just well, maybe we can have lots of string going in lots of different directions. Maybe we can keep the string.
I think crazy superstring's a great idea. Let's go with
Yeah,
crazy superstring theory.
crazy super string.
Can I just say, by the way, I think because you said you wiped your lens with your thumb and it made it much cleaner, and I've wiped mine, and I think I look like I'm now trying to appear in a 1970s advert for chocolate where everyone's been a little bit while everyone else is answering, I'm just going to see if I can clean it a bit more. Is that okay?
Okay. Yeah.
It looks a bit Vaselined. I'm
Yeah, and I
gonna.
didn't want people to think it was out of vanity. How's that look?
Oh, yes, you are much more distinct now.
Yes, you
Yeah.
mean old? Yes, I look very old now.
I meant distinct. Before you were a charcoal drawing, fuzzy charcoal drawing. Now you're a nice crisp ink sketch.
I'm gonna come in as a chair, boringly, bringing Sonny in, who otherwise at this point might not interject. And actually, that's one of the disadvantages of ADHD chaos and the weave that goes everywhere. Some of us would never, ever get a word in. And I think that's really interesting, especially when we're talking to someone who works with silences and counselling and how. So two things today is a neurodivergent panel inherently likely to be chaotic, and what do you think about the weavy stringy thing? How does that work for you and maybe your clients?
Yeah, no, thanks, Kate. It's funny because I'm going to do that thing that I do a lot in sessions, which is I have three thoughts and I'm going to lose some of them on the way. But yeah, as I was listening to you, to all of you, I was kind of thinking, oh, I have things to say, but I'm not used to saying things. Like I'm not used to interjecting because I'm used to threads just unspooling in the ways that they do. And it's not that I don't say anything in sessions, but it's sort of like, I kind of watch or like listen to the client's process, and then I say stuff when there's like a moment. Um, but what you described, Robin, I think I'm really familiar with. I've described it as constellation thinking or constellational thinking in the past. It's this idea that like we take these disparate points and find links between them, and that feels chaotic to other people, right? It's like, how did you just get from A to 7? But I kind of think that I mean, obviously, like it makes absolute sense to the person making the connection. And I think certainly for me, like in a therapy session or something, it's almost like it's like contained chaos because it's still within the frame of the relationship and within that hour. And it's not contained in a boring way. It's contained in a way that you can really go wild and go really deep and go really far into things, um, without kind of going, oh no, am I going to lose the person? Am I going to like lose the thread? So yeah, I kind of really like constellations. I think it's there's something that kind of I think about quite a lot. Is I've noticed I used to run art workshops quite a long time ago, and I noticed that quite often neurodivergent, like autistic ADHD folks might say, oh, I'm not very creative because I know where these ideas came from. And I kind of think that like we just follow the thread quite well. So it's like, oh yeah, I saw a picture of an armadillo and then I watched Donald Duck and now I've drawn this thing and it's drawn from both of those things and also the way my aunt talked when she saw that pineapple. And like I don't know. I don't know how non-neurodivergent people draw inspiration, but it wouldn't surprise me if we're like taking from multiple sources and if we're tracking it, then we see those constellations. Sorry,
Well, the
that's
good thing is that Armadillo and Donald Duck, you are slowly creating a platypus, which has always been extremely difficult for people. But I just want to add something just to say, when I said chaotic, I think, as you were saying as well, which is, well, it's not chaotic for us.
yeah.
So I think that's an important other side to it, which is I often say to people that if you're going out with five neurodivergent people, try and have one neurotypical friend who every half an hour will say, can we shut down some of the windows now because you've opened too many? And they can sometimes so it never becomes linear again, but it is because I'm never dissatisfied with the chaos, I think.
Joanne, where were you on chaos in conversation?
Chaos in conversation. I mean, I have both kinds of experiences. Sometimes I'm one of the agents of chaos, and sometimes I have that experience of just disappearing slowly from the room because you can't quite get a purchase on the chaos today.
Mm.
But I do like the idea of being a bit disruptive because I often have an urge to do it. So if I'm in a meeting, a very work sort of meeting, I feel like it's too predictable. I know meetings aren't meant to be entertaining, but I need a bit of unpredictable to keep my attention from totally drifting away.
Mm.
So I sit there thinking, well, I know what everyone's going to say and when they're going to say it roughly. So the tension builds up, and then I blurt something so that I don't fall asleep.
But that's how many people, how many of us here, if you start watching a film and after 10 minutes you've gone, I know where this is going, just on streaming, go immediately to the last 5 minutes because I can't. And I've had more. I wondered how many people did that, and I certainly find with both ADHD and autism and AUDHD, obviously when it's all that bit of going, no, I know where it's going now. No, no, there's no fun. What happens in the last 3 minutes? That's save time, and that means you can watch 8 films in an evening. And I
Oh,
think that feels to me the same with the meeting because I that moment
yeah.
of madness that occurs when you just want to scream, or if you have to have go to a normal party or something,
Mm,
and you, in the end, you will crack at one point, and then people will go, "Who's that weirdo?"
yeah.
And in many ways, it's a tremendous moment of relief as you're thrown out the front door.
It's funny, isn't it? I mean, supposedly we follow scripts, but actually, what Robin and I have been talking about, and I wonder if Kate and Sonny found this too, is that the scripts really bore us.
Mm.
And we
Yeah.
want to scribble all over the scripts.
That's the thing. It's like we want to draw, at least draw around the edges, right? Add the kind of rude marginalia and like I don't do it with films, Robin, but I definitely with like writing or with art. If I've planned it, it's done. Like I made the
Right.
plan. I'm not interested in seeing it through 'cause I
Mm.
know what it's going to look like. Whereas if I don't know where it's going to go, then that's interesting, right? That's exciting.
Mm.
The idea of, yeah, also for me, the idea of doing it with a film is no. I've just watched Bridgerton. I will not spoilerize the fourth series for anyone who is watching it. But it was very obvious where it was going to go. Like it's based on the Cinderella story. But my great pleasure was in going along the quite predictable path to what happened and knowing that at some point we would probably find out that the will that she was mentioned in, anyway, I won't spoilerize it. But the part of me wanted to be in politics or a politician.
Mhm.
But there is, I've looked, there's clearly no way I could because the sort of conversations that you have to have,
Mhm.
even like the most well-meaning conversations about this is why we're saving the world, this is why we're doing good things with bins, this is why we're not having war. Oh, boring. Like we know, like tell us a new thing. That's not good, is it? Like it would be best not to sit on a panel about saving the world, saying you've heard all these arguments before, we know that, and get to the good bit. Do you know
But
what I
that
mean?
is the right way of doing it. The right way of doing it is saying, why are we having this conversation again? We've had this
Mm.
conversation. We've done. That's what I've always found hugely problematic in any like when I used to work for the BBC and stuff like that. This bit of why are we having another meeting? We haven't done anything since the last meeting. And I used to have this 3 meeting rule that I would say, I'm not doing a third meeting if nothing's happened since meeting 1 and 2. Because that just means that the meeting people are always busy doing nothing.
Yeah, I think it'd be really interesting if politics actually kind of didn't have the same conversations again and again,
Mm.
right? And I don't know what it's serving. It's kind of, I was thinking about like one of the things I really like about therapy is that we get to the deep conversations, like the conversations where people say, "Oh, I don't know, I can't talk about this in any other context." And it's like skipping all of the small talk, all of the scripting, all of the other stuff. We need to have
Yeah.
those conversations.
So that I feel like that brings us to weirdness then. Actually, as in one of the uses, one of the great uses of weirdness, which can be to disrupt maybe. And both Robin and Joanne, you have weird in your book titles. Is that part of the wanting to reclaim weird or use weird as disruptive force? Joanne first.
Yes. Well, I was consciously thinking of how LGBTQ people have reclaimed queer, and then I was thinking about how disabled people have reclaimed crip. So you could queer something or crip something. So I thought, well, in that case, you can weird something. And the other function it had for me in the book was that, I knew that I couldn't diagnose anybody, but I certainly could not diagnose people posthumously. But I've been called weird my whole life. So let's call these women Virginia Woolf and the mother that Asperger came across, and Johannes Kepler's mother, and this young woman who was killed by the Nazis. Let's say they were all weird. And it's a much more inclusive term as well, because you aren't dependent on whether you've gone through a medical gateway or not. And it's much softer at the edges. You don't have to worry so much about where those lines are.
It's also, I think, a lot easier for a woman to be weird in the eyes of society, because it's like that thing that I remember, I think I quote it loads, but when I was doing a thing with the writer and director Alice Lowe, she said, "We're all allowed one weird." And the trouble is, if you're a woman, society says you're weird. So she said, the fact that she would then write these brilliant weird films, people would find it too weird, because they go, "No, but already you're a woman making art, and that's a little bit weird." And so I think, in that way, there is then that, and I think in the same way that when women are called difficult, when you go, that wouldn't be what a man got called, that would be all of those different things. So I think even then, the weirdness, I think even more there needs to be. I often think with someone like Josie Long, the reason that Josie has not had all of the plaudits she deserves and all of the success she deserves is because people just, I don't quite get this, and I don't understand how they don't quite get it, because what I see is just a very curious and excited and fascinating person, but the restrictions and the limits of the limits of personality so often that are placed on people, I think, of what is an acceptable amount of personality.
And I think the bandwidth of acceptability for women in so many ways is so narrow. You can so easily come up against it. And I think, the demands for how we present ourselves, particularly, I mean, I would never, ever think about, trying to get into television, because I know I could not make myself look right. And I don't know that I would have the same thought if I were a man of a similar age, for example. I can't perform femininity properly. And so that makes me less legible to people, which is possibly the same with Josie Long, who I think looks lovely, but she doesn't perform conventional femininity, does she?
No, and I think that's where a lot of also the aggression towards her occurs.
Of course. How dare we? How dare we? I mean, I remember when I was 17 and I was just walking down the street and I was a bit scruffy and not wearing any makeup, and I dared to make eye contact with the boys. He came towards me and he went, "Dog." The aggression, the fury that I hadn't dolled myself up and then looked to one side, that he had the right to throw that at me. Yeah, so I mean, I can only imagine what it's like when you're in public in some way to be the target of that.
So I think that's why weird's really, sorry, I'm talking, I apologize, I shouldn't have done.
That's all right. Oh,
Oh.
bless. Oh no, that was like a really like pained interruption thing. I would expect you to interrupt, but yeah, I was on purpose bringing Sonny in at that point because
Oh,
uh,
please.
Sonny, in terms of having transitioned, what happens for you around like does that alter your relationship to weird and weirdness?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking that actually as Joanne was talking, like, I noticed that people don't comment on my appearance anymore in public. People used to constantly ask me where I'm from. I'd get sort of like all the kind of comments that you'd expect of a person who was like both read as female and read as not white.
Mhm.
And since I started passing as mask, like people leave me alone, and it's like a very weird. Um, it's like simultaneously invisible but visible. So it's like it's invisible but with power, in the sense that people aren't saying, um, people are getting out of the way, but they don't feel like they have a right to my business, which is very interesting. And
Mm.
so, like, talk about weird, right? In the sort of more in the sort of sense of like that's a sort of quite a strange experience to sort of see, to go from one to the other. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's something that I've written about recently in there's a book on um, male shame in counseling that's coming out at some point. Um, but as I was writing about this experience, it was the first time I wrote about anywhere that I thought other people would see. I wasn't sure if it would be too weird. Like, I was nervous about it being too weird an experience, that then people would sort of read it and think, oh, I don't want to go near it. And I think that's part of that as well. It's what you were both talking about, is like people, there's this kind of, I think, real fear in society of like going near things that are seen as too different, that don't fit a particular mold. Like, I don't use he, him, or she, her. I use they, them.
Yeah,
And not being binary is in itself like seen as quite a weird thing in society, right? Um, and that in itself is something that, like, it feels like normative society doesn't like to go near. And one way to normative society deals with that is to ignore it completely, and another way is to be aggressive towards it.
See, I think that is really that whole, because like I don't have he, him, or anything, any of those, and the only reason I don't is because I consider that it would be such an enormous leap to make myself so definite. So I think if I was younger, I would probably have defined myself as non-binary. It's like a generational, because I do, and it's interesting when all of you talk about all these things, it makes me think how weird normality is. And that's the other thing that we're trying to do, isn't it? Which is to go, I always find it odd when, when I'm working at night and I'm on trains and all the men are going out together and they're nearly all only talking about football, and all the women are going out together, and the middle-aged couples are going out acceptably as four, and one of them's being all kind of like, they're making swinger jokes or whatever. And if you have to go to a normal party, if it's like it's a normal, as in like, where I live, that perhaps it would be with the parents of, from the school or whatever, where my son goes, then the speed in which you find out that all the women are in one room and all the men are in another room seems to me to be, because it's not like the rest of my life at all, because in the rest of my life I'm with people where we don't think about that. And yet we have, quite often, if someone's got, if a man has a female friend, there'll be a lot of nudging in so much culture. And that, to me, all of that is weird. All of that fear that comes from that, and all of that division. And I think that's part of the, how can we not how can we have a society, this demand of binary on so many different things? It seems to me to be enormously problematic and place people in a position of pain.
definitely. And I'd agree with you, being a similar age, that if I were younger, I probably would have defined myself as non-binary too. And it would have been a great relief. And it would have made my path through, certainly through university, I imagine. I mean, it might have been difficult in different ways, but it wouldn't have been difficult in the ways that it was difficult. Mm.
I'm fighting the urge in the places where I am at the moment to just shout out, normality is totally contingent and contextual, everyone, because that feels like the most urgent thing that I can say. And I know war, death, climate change, but actually it's the normality thing that feels like a constant delusion and illusion that people have bought into. And I've just moved from the north of England down to Somerset, and I've moved from a seaside northeast town that's primarily working class with quite a lot of middle class people in, to a Somerset town that was working class but now has a lot of DFLs, down from Londoners, and middle class people in. And I go in a cafe each morning in both places still. I'm actually back in the northeast at this moment. Right? I go in the cafe and in the Somerset town, I look around, nearly everyone has turned up jeans, right? Which I gather is called having a cuffed jeans. Lots of the men are dressed like Nordic elves, which is an aesthetic I've not really seen before. They have bobble hats and they're wearing workwear and their socks very colourful. And then, right, up in the northeast, no one has turned up jeans, no one at all. And there are no Nordic elves. But I used to think that the northeast place, that was normal. And I still think Frome is weird. But I realise across each place, but everyone in the places is just going, this is how we are here. This is what we do. Some rules happened in Frome that made all the turning up jeans happen. I still don't really understand what's going on. And they made them not happen here in colour coats. And that's such a little, tiny, minor example of the normality that people are swimming in the same country. It's not even, it's not even that different, really. And yet, so never mind.
How do they all know? Sorry, how do they all know? This is what I've always wondered. This is how you know you're probably neurodivergent when you look around, everyone's dressed the same way, or they've been to see the same film, or they've all got their sunglasses on their heads, or suddenly, and you think, where was the signal? I missed it.
Yes, yes, and that's it. In Frome, there's a signal, and they picked it up, and they're doing it. Not everyone. Sorry, people in Frome.
Yeah.
But some process happened, and I know there is no flipping way I'm going to go through that process. Although, if I wore jeans, particularly, I would be questioning what was happening with my jeans at this moment. Yes, I would. But it's not a signal. It's.
Can I just tell you one thing about Frome that you hopefully know? Do you know that the manager of the independent bookshop there, that she's quite adept at tap dancing?
I did not know that, but
I did an event with her at Frome
Yeah.
Festival, and she said, I really want to do this because she's neurodivergent as well, which I don't think is spilling any. I think that's how. And she tap dances. And I said, and she said, is it all right if you're rather doing a solo show, I can interview you at the festival? I said, yes, but only if you tap dance. And she did, and it was great.
I
Excellent.
love that. Tina has greeted me to Frome beautifully and told me about her recent joyous diagnosis, actually. And I'll get her tap dancing more whenever we're doing a thing. This is a good thing to know. I bet Tina doesn't have cuff jeans.
Oh, I'm distracted about the upturned jeans. Actually, you mean the bottom is rolled up, because there's one thing I've discovered about them, because I had a pair of jeans that were too long, and I turned the bottom up because they were getting wet. And I've discovered if you go out into the woods, which I do, and look for mushrooms and bugs and stuff in the undergrowth, and then you go home, your jeans will bring bits of the wood back with you that you get to look at later. Just and I do appreciate.
Bonus. I found myself wondering if maybe it was the jeans that had received a signal and they'd all turn themselves up.
Well, if you're getting bits of woodland in there, it might turn out there's now a mycorrhizal network of denim, which is therefore informing the genes to turn up.
Yeah.
Yes.
It all goes back to the mushrooms, all of fashion.
Yeah. It's all about the mycelium.
Well, we don't know how they are, how they're influencing us. So,
No.
And actually, I'm happy about mushrooms being a network. So theoretically, I should be happy that these networks are happening among the people, but I'm not, because these unspoken networks are the normative ones that hurt and exclude us. Not specifically the genes ones, to be fair. But yes, whatever mechanism that is, it's not as benign as the one
No.
that connects the rhizomatic mushrooms.
and I think that's it, is that, we have fashions in like queer and neurodivergent communities, right? We have like things that kind of spread mycorrhizally, but it's about whether they're oppressive or not. And I think it's one of the things I like about um using normativity as a way of framing kind of these things. Is it oppressive? Is it saying this is how you're supposed to be now, rather than,
Mm.
hey, here's a fun thing, if you turn up your jeans you can pick up bits of moss on the way home, like that's not normativity, right? That's kind of being driven by excitement or interest or curiosity.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question about, because quite often this is a theory I've got, and Sonny, you can tell me how wrong it is. But when sometimes people talk about the connection between, say, the number of trans people who are also autistic, and my theory is that because it's very hard to take anything as read, that each title that we're given is not just, okay, I'm that and we move on, of whatever it might be, or indeed why the world works as it does. So it in fact has that, what should be very healthy thing, which is always asking, what does it mean to be this? What does it mean to be that? And I just wondered how you feel, because I just remember a while ago just starting to think, well, I think that's part of the reason in terms of when we look at sex and gender, and sometimes we see some of the links in terms of the diversity that we might see in neurodivergent communities in terms of that, which is because nothing is just, it's not easy to just accept, because you go, well, what if acceptance is the thing that keeps normal society running? If that is what, because it's certainly something I've always thought about, all of these things. I've always been attracted as well to a lot of kind of thinkers, and a lot of the diaries that I used to read when I was growing up would always be people who were not necessarily within, that would have expressed themselves in so many different ways. I just wondered
Yeah,
what your reaction to that is, Sonny.
yeah, I mean, I think, and I don't know how much it's about like that neurodivergent urge to sort of say, yeah, but why? Right? Like, well, how does this work? But I also think, yeah, like once you start peeling back the fabric of normality and going, well, this doesn't work, then you just keep peeling, right? So, like, certainly for me, I think, on the theme of like this talk, the first thing I wrote about realizing I was autistic was things that make me weird. And one of the things that I said in that was about gender identity, I think. And before that point, I also realized that I don't really fit in any kind of like cultural group. And like that just kind of expands outwards, right? You get to a point where you're like, well, none of these categories really work. And I see that quite a lot with people I work with as well, is that, and it might be quite a sort of difficult thing as well. A person might say, oh, another thing that makes me weird. Like, how do I deal with that? And it kind of reminds me of um, one of the people I read quite a lot for my therapy work is Carl Rogers, who was I think a really weird guy, who really was the sort of father of person-centered therapy, and he wrote this line in one of his books where he talks about freedom being irreversible, and what he was talking about was, he was saying that, describing these people who'd experienced freedom to be themselves for a moment. And he was saying, even if they lose that again, they never forget it. It becomes irreversible. They will always have a drive to be free, to experience that being themselves kind of feeling. And I think maybe that's part of what happens. Like we have a moment of experiencing freedom, we can't unfeel it, and we start moving more and more towards ourselves, even if that means becoming more and more weird. And the weight of oppression is still there, and it can become heavier, but you're always aware of this, this selfness that you've experienced, right? It's like, wait, that's real to me, and I can't move away from it anymore.
That feels so powerful, doesn't it? Freedom, the idea of freedom being irreversible. I mean, I feel like I don't, because I've kind of spoken to you, well, I've interviewed you, Robin, on stage, and I've spoken to you, Joanne, in many other contexts. And so I feel like I semi-public, basically, in summary, Robin, I get the impression, and your book is really clear about this, and you've talked about this on stage, your diagnosis, your ADHD diagnosis was liberating in terms of the self-knowledge process it led to. And Joanne, for you, it feels like in certain ways your autism diagnosis has been liberating, but actually not yet perhaps the full big bang liberation of I am
and this is what we were sort of talking about in a personal context the other week. I think because there are countervailing forces in my life, because I was someone's mum. And so I'm still his mother, but he's off at university now. So I felt a really strong pressure not to be so weird that it put him at a disadvantage in the world we were moving in. And my husband's got health problems, so I have to be the wife with him going to hospital, and I can't be too weird there. And that there was, I think, as you talked about, the very conventional Jewish middle class family that I came from. So I'm struggling to some extent to be myself, because it feels like in order to do that I would have to drop things. And there's a bit in the book, actually, I think it's Socially Gracious Joanne, the construction of Socially Gracious Joanne, I talk about, and how I came to see her as kind of my best ever creation, but actually she limits my movement quite a lot, and also limits my utility to other marginalized people, because she is aping, the middle class nice white lady thing.
That is complicated. Whereas Robin,
it's incredibly, yes.
and I'm in my current position as apparently someone who just likes to go, yeah, just go for freedom. And I'm like, oh, it seems to be more complex than that. It's more complex than that. And Robin, for you, it is more complex than that, and yet a liberating thing.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I suppose that complexity is ultimately that I had to resign from the job, which was the most secure job that I had, because the freedom that I got from no longer being able to be kind of, bullied or, and shut up, meant that I could not remain within the constrictions of. Whereas I think, had I not been diagnosed, had Jamie, the as I always say, the autistic stranger that suddenly appeared in my timeline and said, "I have something to tell you," had that not happened, I would still be doing that job, but I would be deeply unhappy, as I was for most of my life. So, that kind of thing. And so there are, and I also am very aware that it's very different for me, because for a lot of people who are diagnosed, a lot of people who find out about their neurodivergence, if they have a very normal job, they have a lot of things, whereas I am predominantly in control of my world because I'm self-employed. I now literally don't have anyone who can tell me what to do apart from me when I'm on stage or I'm writing or whatever, apart from the editor every now and again, who I do disagree with. But anyway, so I do also understand that for a lot of other people, there are even, and then the sadness that I feel as well, Joanne, is that there's a sadness of going, I wonder how many people, when we're doing normal, would really love not to be normal too. And how do we seed those conversations which allow us to sometimes find out, okay, I'm not going to be able to go down that route with that person, but this person is, as a performer, I was this afternoon, the gig that I was doing, I was talking about Grace Petrie, the brilliant singer-songwriter and activist, that when Josie Long and me and her, you did a little tour together, and one night there was a woman who looked sad in the audience, and we were worried about her, and then she'd gone at the end, and then a year later she came back to see Grace on her own at that venue and left a note saying, I was really sad when I came to see you and Josie and Robin because I didn't know what was going wrong in my life. And then she watched Grace, and she went, oh yeah, why am I going out with that bloke? I'm a lesbian. And of course she will have known that. It will have been, but for her, she suddenly sees Grace on stage. She sees the power and the passion, and she probably sees the reactions of some of the people around her as well. And so I think that thing sometimes where we can kind of go, how do we also not merely hide who we are for the convenience of others? How do we also leak out those bits, allow others to go, oh, I'm glad you mentioned that as well.
And it's, I mean, I hadn't really, I think I had kind of wondered whether your, and sympathies, because the conflict and chaos around your leaving of the Infinite Monkey Cage seems a horrible thing to have to endure, actually. I hadn't realised how closely you were linking that to your post-diagnostic liberation, can't put up with crap anymore type thing.
Yeah, I think again it goes back to that thing when we were talking earlier on about freedom. You know, it is that freedom, and the thing that kept me there for longer than I probably should have done, because I mean it reached, there's a bit I wrote about in the Normally Weird book where I wrote about when some BBC executives said they believed that I was having a mental health crisis. And in fact, I was better than I'd ever been. I'd never been happy or whatever. And I kind of use that as a way of saying that sometimes when you're better, those who have relied on your self-loathing or your bullying of yourself or whatever, they find it very difficult. And so they decide you must be ill now when you're better. And the BBC were appalled that I had given this away, this conversation away, and said they felt it was a breach of confidentiality. And I said, it's not a breach of confidentiality if you're talking about my mental health. I think if I'd been talking about Brian Cox's mental health or our producer's mental health, that would have. But I had, and I lied in that section, really. I removed so many things that had caused that to be an extremely painful month of my life. And from that point, I really kind of felt this isn't going to last forever for sure, because I knew there were certain antagonistic things going on in the background. And I mainly stayed because I didn't want to betray the people who I knew loved listening to it. And then there was a point where, and every single day, sorry if this sounds self-aggrandizing, I apologize, but I bump into people who will say, I'm glad you did that, even though I love the show. And to have that bit of strength to make up then for all the aggression you get from the various different interested parties who live on Twitter and are great fans of a wizard author. I think I've spoken about that in a cagey enough way there, haven't I? But sorry, yeah. So I've talked for too long.
Is there an inevitable sacrifice? And I feel like you probably see this, Sonny, in your clients and in counselling processes then. Is there an inevitable sacrifice in gaining your irreversible freedom and becoming more your weird self?
Don't know if it's inevitable, but you know what Robin you was saying about kind of the exec's kind of comments on your mental health, that it reminds me of some of the training I do with therapists, where I sort of say, like, what is it that you expect therapy to do, right? So the normative answer is people are happy, right? They go away and they're all well, everything's good. And like, if you're weird, if you're trans or if you're neurodivergent or if you're just different in any way, like, I'm not sure a healthy response to oppression is, oh, I'm all well now, everything's fine, right? So like experiencing that freedom means also we feel that oppression more strongly. That's I think what both of you, all of you have been talking about. And as we experience that more strongly, we get hopping mad, right? We get angry, we get sad, we get so yeah, I think that is part of the experience, and it is a sacrifice that we end up feeling the ways in which we've had our corners rounded more by normativity, right? We've been kind of shaved down or oppressed or squashed. And I liked what I can't remember, one of you was talking about essentially representation, right? Like, oh, the Grace Petrie story. Like, representation is when, to me, is when those of us who are able to have a moment of being like, okay, I can be out. And that gives another example of ways of being that's okay, ways of being free that's okay. And I think people are able to sort of express themselves into that. Like, I think about that a lot in when I first realized I was autistic and I started hanging out with other autistic people. One of the ways of expressing ourselves was having like fidget toys, right? Having, I think it was like tangles at the time. So I'd have a tangle, somebody else would have a tangle. I'd be like, oh, you're autistic. And that was fashion. That was like recognizing ways of being weird. But it was like kind of dipping a toe into, okay, this is a way that I can start being weird now. I can start stimming in a certain way. And that kind of gave me more space to be myself. And I think over time we can like make even more space. But as we do, yeah, we experience how hard it is. The more space for ourselves, the more we experience that oppression.
I love that Ashley's story on dinosaur is sort of feeling away on it. And I actually find while I'm watching it, I start kind of echoing her, and it's very freeing. And I love that.
It's the writing workshops that I run for late diagnosed neurodivergent people. Often it's not so much in what we all write, although that is part of it. It is in the fact that in that space, everybody knows that if they share something like that they are using their tangle, or someone came to the door earlier that day and it was the worst thing that had happened, or they smile at dogs in the street before humans, or whatever it is, and we know in that space it is understood, it is accepted, and this quite hard won freedom to be weird is suddenly less difficult in this.
It's huge. I mean, the first time, this must be about 10 years ago now. For mainstream arts, I taught my first ever class that was just for autistic people. And so towards the end of the day, I get tired and I lose my words, and I stumbled a bit, and I said to this class of people, oh, sorry, my language processing is starting to fray a bit, or words that effect. They all went, oh, okay. And then we just carried on. Whereas if you said that in front of certain other classes, you get. But I always make the point of being out when I teach. And quite often what happens is that partly because I'm a bit face blind and I don't want to offend people because I haven't remembered their name. But also I know I can guarantee that someone in that room who hadn't come out will come out. Because they realise, because I'm standing at the front and I'm a teacher and I'm the autistic, that it's all right for me to be in this room as well. And sometimes I think it's the most important thing that I do as a teacher.
Yeah, and I think when you're being open about your process, then at least a few other people will be like, oh, it's safe for me to be open about my process too, right? And even for the people who maybe don't get it so much, power in that room, so they're able to sort of go, oh, maybe saying that I've lost my words for the moment is okay.
Yeah, and I never cover up when I do something wrong. I think possibly, I don't know if it's an autistic thing, but I don't think I naturally mind much about saving face. This is something about the world in general that I don't understand. If you've made a mistake, say so.
And even it feels like, because actually, and the title of this session or panel is Writing Weirdness, but then beforehand, Fergus Murray, founder of Weird Pride Day, said, oh, don't worry too much about writing weirdness, that's the thing. And I was like, yes, but I was mainly thinking about writing weirdness. You're all writers who have really inspired me quite directly with your writing and speaking publicly. And I too am a writer. It feels like even if you yourself are struggling with your own liberated, free, weird self in a particular moment, if you've written it down or performed it, it still exists, doesn't it? And you're not
Yes.
necessarily embodying it yourself at every moment, but you put it down and someone can access that at some point.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's a really that because I often say to people that the one of the advantages if you can turn something into a poem or just a sentence or a story or whatever, then you have a solid as opposed to being the rapid movement of thoughts that you carry with you or indeed of your past or whatever it might be. The moment you've placed it on paper, you are able to interrogate it in a different way because it is physical and it is in front of you. And I think you're right about that bit where sometimes when you're writing, and I think I find it most immediately in poetry, which is I write something because I write it very immediately and it's like I get an idea and I go and so there's no real filter there. And then some nights I go out and go, oh, everyone's crying. And you realize that it's because there were because I think that bit when you were saying, Joanne, there about not minding making mistakes. I think
Mm.
one of the things that can sometimes come with quite a few neurodivergent people, which can be an issue for those who wish it to be a typical environment, is a level of honesty, because actually so much of our society relies on having a secret or telling a lie. It's a bit like watching currently at the moment, watching Hannah Spencer and Zach Polanski. And I think one of the issues for the media with them and for other politicians is they're not playing a game of obfuscation.
No.
They're saying these things, and you can literally see, if you wanted to imagine, and I'm not, but if you wanted to imagine neurodivergence versus neurotypical in this kind of battle, this is what it looks like, which is this incredible confusion of going, why are you not following the rules? Why
Yeah.
you're not? This is well, I don't know how to deal with you then. And you see this aggression towards them, and I think again I see that in a very similar way to the aggression that you get. Well, why are you saying that? What you're saying you're special? Well, actually, all of those different things are examples of where doing something which to you is entirely natural
Mm.
breaks. What was it you said, Kate? You had that great societal, contextual, very anyway. It was a very clever phrase and far too good to be able to come out of my mouth. But that one where you talked about, the societal and contextual kind of behaviour.
Mm.
Oh,
Yeah, I actually thought I was thinking earlier when we were talking about meetings and things that Zach Polanski is like I don't know what his status is, but the role he is playing, he's like the neurodivergent person at the meeting,
Mm.
going, I'm going to say the thing that everyone else is avoiding saying because I don't know why they're avoiding saying it because it's actually the point that
Yeah.
they're talking round and round and round and round, and I find it so refreshing too.
It's
and
so
it feels
different.
like it's
Oh, sorry.
oh, it's the counter. So one of the things people would say about Trump or Boris Johnson or Farage was, oh, they're so authentic. Like you could just go down the pub because they're so honest and unfiltered. But actually, they're a awful version of honest, unfiltered. It's like
Yeah,
Zach
everything's
Polanski.
got it. Yeah, everything's got its shadow side, hasn't it?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Sonny, sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, I mean, I was going to say it's sort of the difference between saying what they're expected to say, like what a person should say, right?
Mm.
But the sort of Trump example is interesting as well because I think that one of the things there is that it comes with massive privilege. And that's one of the reasons it's different. Like Musk is autistic, but the things that he says comes with massive privilege. So when he says things and doesn't care about the impact,
Mm.
it's not the honest thing necessarily, right? Um yeah, I don't know. There's something about when quite often like autistic, like neurodivergent people speak and people say, "Oh, that's so honest," and I'm kind of like interested in that because to me it sort of almost reminds me of a certain exoticization that I see like when it comes to race, for example, or transness, right? People will say, "Oh, there's a," and I find it quite weird because it's like um you know, like everyone has their weirds, but not everyone is able to speak them. And
Also, it's interesting the thing of Farage and Johnson, which of course is they're not authentic at all. Farage likes drinking wine. He doesn't like drinking beer. Boris Johnson is not this avuncular. I've met people who've said that he's the nastiest person they've ever met, and so in fact they are what I find strange, and I would imagine all of you do as well, which is where we see people that we're told are authentic, and we go, but they're not. That's the most obvious pretend. Everything Farage stands for is this pretense of wanting to help the poorest in society, with where in fact everything he's really saying is exactly the opposite of that. But he's used, yeah, man, but yeah, I think that's one of the advantages, isn't it? Is that if you have had to adopt a mask out of sometimes necessity, it does help you work out those people who are wearing masks for their own kind of venality as well.
yeah, because it's not a normative masking, right? It's like a sort of extreme masking, but it's still masking.
It's well, it only really applies to marginal people, but the well, it's a burlesque. That's the word I'm thinking. What they're doing is a burlesque, because the other word I was thinking about that I just need to find. Oh yeah, Irving Goffman in Stigma, the sociologist, he talks about minstrelization and how when you're in a marginal group, you can wind up overperforming. So if I was to do, the fast talking, neurotic, wisecracking Jewish thing, that would be minstrelization. For
And
example.
I personally, as a totally do a thing with my northernness that is really often quite close to minstrelization. It's a complicated thing, and I just had to do an interesting version of it while on stage with Simon Armitage, effectively professional northerner poet, at a gig in Middlesbrough, having just moved to Frome and being in visceral shock at how awful Middlesbrough town centre is looking and sort of without hope. And my performance of northernness cracked and was fighting with my unfiltered, determined to, it suits me on stage to be as unfiltered as possible, to access something childlike, to access something very real. So and I see Boris Johnson do that, actually. So it's not quite as simple as, and he's faking and I'm true. I'm like, I see what you're doing. I do that exactly that sometimes. I know exactly what it feels like. I feel far too much sympathy sometimes for Boris Johnson. He's a knobhead, but also I'm like, I do that. I understand. And I've complexified it greatly by moving to the south, and it has made me remember how how complex. I'm just using the word complex a lot. In summary, it's complex.
It is. It is, and sometimes sometimes it's useful for us to mask. It's useful for us to sort of be a bit of a burlesque of ourselves, because it's a shorthand. Yeah.
Also, there's a difference with what I think you're saying, Kate, and you can correct me on this, which is I think when you're adopting that, part of the reason you're adopting that is kind of almost like, this is my survival technique for this situation. Whereas what Johnson's doing is, this is my Trojan horse to then steal all this stuff and smash all that stuff up. So again, I think the intention, and then indeed the reason behind, because I see a lot of performers will strengthening of their original accent happens when they go on stage, because it creates a slightly more solid carapace initially as you're kind of venturing your way to project your personality. He's not doing it for that survival technique. He's doing it for, I consider, criminality.
A fair distinction, and actually perhaps for me it's also it connects closely to weird. The more northern I am, the more down to earth I am perceived as, the more connected I can be to people who sort of require me to be that, and actually the more of my actual weird can emerge. So there's a dance there.
And one of the things that's interesting, I think, is that, I was thinking in the background, like, you know, we can use weird for good or we can use it for evil, but like we don't really hear people describe Boris Johnson as weird, even though he is intensely weird,
He
right?
is
There's
deeply weird.
yes, right. So there is something about kind of weird as authenticity, or as a route towards authenticity, for example, for the individual, versus weird for power, weird for something, which I think people don't describe that as weird because people use weird as a pejorative, right? People use weird to say, oh, that person who's on the outside, not that person with power.
Yeah.
I'm going to note as nominal chair. We've been going about an hour, which is a usual and good length for this sort of panel. So perhaps a time to wrap up towards a conclusion. I love that we're talking about good uses of weird, using the power of weird for good in the world. Maybe that's something to conquer. Like, is it weird that'll save the world? Or some other final thought do you have?
Oh, I like it's like a standoff in a spaghetti western. All right, then I'll go. I'll be Lee Van Cleef. I, I think it's I think what that really is saying is to encourage people to be who they are, going back again to that Grace story, for instance. And I know that also with Josie, you know, when people watch her, there are so many people who've seen and it's a bit like sometimes when I talk about horror films, when I loved horror films when I was a kid, the 1930s ones, they're filled with characters who are not normal as such. Sometimes it's a level of campness. Sometimes it's just a level of eccentricity, in the same way that, you know, for a lot of people brought up with Doctor Who, there are these characters in there who are not archetypal swashbuckling heroes. There's something different about them. And I think in that way, you know, to allow people, you know, but sometimes you meet people who might be in there. I met this woman who was about 78, and her husband had died a few years before, and she said she found it really, really difficult, and she couldn't really, it didn't just feel like grieving, there was something odd going on. And then she realized, she read one day about boarding school syndrome, and she was sent to a boarding school when she was 5 years old. And she realized that what she'd been carrying with her for a whole, I mean, imagine that, 5 years old, you're sent to a convent, all that, you don't see your parents. She was now much happier because she finally found out at that age what part of and I'm, you know, quite often I will talk about that thing, and sometimes, you know, it can be trauma rooted or all manner of things, but anything which allows you to go, this does not have to be concealed. And if I reveal and find out that someone rejects me because of what I reveal, then that's their loss. And I need, you know, because I'm sure everyone here may well have lost friends or relationships have changed. But more often than not, I hope most of the time after a little bit has passed that you go, they weren't healthy for me, rather than I've lost something good.
Yeah.
And I kind of want to follow on from what you said, Robin, because it feels really kind of resonant with what's in my mind as well, is that I feel like expressing weirdness is a leap of faith in a way, because for me, I've had sort of my experience, my constellation of experiences has meant that I've never met anyone that's quite like me. But every time I've sort of written or talked about some of my experiences, somebody has got in touch and said, oh, I've never heard anyone talk about that before. I've had that experience. And, you know, I hear that echoed in all kinds of ways when I work with people as well, or when I read people, read other people's writing. And I think that's the potential. It's like, I see that a lot in sort of queerness as well, where like somebody goes, oh, I saw a person who was just like being really queer in public, and that gave me an idea for how I want to be now. And yeah, like it's that leap of faith of going, I'm going to express this and somebody's going to get it. Like somebody's going to make that connection and it's going to be really meaningful. And that's important. We need that, I think.
Yeah. It opens up the possibility for authentic connection. Yeah. I think weirdness, as opposed to just going through the motions and sort of on the face of it interacting with other people, but actually everyone's in their own little sad, lonely space, So I think weirdness can bring connection and joy.
What a wonderful note to end on. Thank you so much, everybody. Here's to the weird, transforming the world.
Okay.
It's